It's often hard to find truly wild carp fishing in the UK. Whilst we are blessed with a range of well-run day tickets, club lakes and syndicates, as well as a connected and thriving carp fishing community, big, wild, unknown carp no longer seem to hold much of a place in the UK scene. For most anglers, however, the ultimate prize remains to be those unknown giants, fish whose very existence blurs the lines between reality and myth. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to find a place that held these unknown monsters. Fish with no names and no previous captures, living their lives in blissful ignorance of anglers and the angling world. To fish the lake, it required monumental effort and a bit of rule bending, but the rewards were well worth it. Over the course of 3 springs, I enjoyed some of the best UK carp fishing you could hope to experience. This is the story of fishing for unknowns from the unknown. Yeah. Action, baby. So let's go to the beginning of this story. It all started back in COVID times. With the world looking like it was going into lockdown, I decided to move back up north to my parents' house. Now, as soon as we could start fishing again, I wanted to be out there on the bank, but I hadn't lived in this part of England for 15 years, so I was really clueless as to where to go, where I wanted to spend my time. I was looking online, trying to find places that would interest me, and I actually got talking to a lad a few years younger than me, a guy called Louis. We've become good friends since, and he was giving me a few spots of where it's worth fishing in the area. Nothing really caught my fancy, and I think he could tell that, because after discussing about a few different venues, he said to me, I've been somewhere, I found some carp spawning, it's a bit of a mammoth task, I think it's going to be a 2-person job. Do you want to come down and take a look? It sounded pretty interesting to me. So we set up a meeting time, we went down for a recce mission, and I pretty much fell in love with the place straight away. It was a big lake, it was a massive fly fishing res, nestled in some quintessential English rolling hill countryside. It was pretty stunning. We got down there, straight away you're just taken aback with how big the place is. But the lake, it was split up into 2 sections. There was the main body of water, which is probably about 90 to 100 acres, and that's where the fly fishermen were all the time. They're out there on their boats, and then it was split by a road, and underneath this road there's a big passageway in which the carp can swim between these 2 bodies of water. The other body of water, it was like an oasis. It was wild, it was untouched, thick weed beds everywhere, fallen trees in there, sunken islands. It was just wild, untouched. It was perfect for me, and from the footage that Louis had shown me, it was in that section of the lake that the carp had spawned. So I honestly started thinking, right, springtime, I think they're going to get into this little oasis, this little lake, spend their time there, spawn there, chill out there, and perhaps that is the only place I'm going to be able to fish. Also, because if I went on the main body of lake, I would think I would have been caught by the rangers and told to move on, as there was no carp fishing allowed pretty quickly. So my focus had to be on this little lake. So accessing the bank on this little lake was extremely difficult. It was so overgrown at this point. We were already well into spring, and the foliage and just the brambles, the nettles, everything, it made it really difficult to actually get to the lakeside of the small section of the lake. We ended up finding a little area where we could crawl underneath the fence, go through a little opening, and it would open up and we could fish the road bank of the little lake. We found this spot, we were looking, we were thinking, is it possible? And as we were there, we saw a mid-20 common swim past. It was patrolling that margin before it turned off into the main body of water, and instantly we both looked at each other and thought, right, this is where we're going to have to spend our time. We can hide away from the public, from passers-by, by being tucked up against the bank, and the fish are already here. So straight away, it was a focus on the pre-baiting campaign. On vast open waters like this, with wild carp and so many naturals, whenever you took weed out of this lake, the amount of naturals in that weed, you could see why the fish that were in there had managed to get to the size that they did get to, because it was just so full of naturals. So baiting, how do you bait somewhere like this? You can't just throw boilies in straight away and think that the fish are going to get on it instantly, because for them, they've never seen a boilie before in their lives. They don't know that it's a food source. So you need to build up their relationship with this bait. So the baiting would go in with a lot of particle, sweet corn, hemp, tigers, things that are are a little bit more natural and the fish are a lot more willing to investigate as a food source. Within that mix, I would put boilies in there. As the baiting would go on, I would dial back the amount of particle in there and focus more on the boilies once I thought that they knew that it was a food item for them. Once you can get these wild carp on boilies, you've really got a good chance of catching them because they so readily want this superfood. So once they realise that they can actually eat it, they're seeking it out, and you've got a much better chance of catching them. So pre-baiting began in earnest. We spent 2 or 3 weeks going down there pretty much every second day, getting that bait mix in there, dialing back on that particle, increasing the amount of boiling until we were at a point where we were happy that the carp were on the feed. It became pretty obvious that the carp got on that bait quite quickly. They would be in that area whenever we went down to bait up, patrolling the margin, swimming around. There'll be bubbles coming up off the spot. As soon as you put bait in, if you waited half an hour, you'd start to see fish activity increasing. So we were quite confident that the fish had got on that bait and we were soon in position to be fishing for them. Also, with the amount of fish we saw, we soon began to build a bit of an idea of the stock of the carp that were in there. It was mainly commons, but really stunning commons. Beautiful shapes to them, cruising around, beautiful chestnut colours, 20, 25, even 30 pounders. There was a really, really nice head of fish in there. We did see some mirrors as well. There was one, a ghosty, that looked like a nice fish, sizable fish. We'd see him quite a lot milling around. I also saw this half Lin looking fish. It looked quite old, but that one looked like a 30 pounder as well. It's probably one of the bigger mirrors I saw. So we were really starting to build an idea of what was in there, what was in this lake, this unknown stock of carp. Me and Louis knew that these fish were worth fishing for. Like, we didn't really see anything under 20 pound, and every single one we saw, we wanted to catch them. The first time to get a rod in soon rolled by. I remember waking up super early, like 4 in the morning, because I was so excited that I knew that that was the day that I was gonna be fishing there. I got down there, crawled through the little space, got into my opening, flicked rods out, sat back and just watched as the world woke up around me. And it wasn't long before the pinprick started appearing over my spot. And it didn't take very long after that until I had an absolute screamer. The fight, I started to realise that all the fights are the same way. These carp have never been fished for before, never been hooked. They just go absolutely crazy to start off with, charging through all the weed beds, stripping line. You can barely control them, but they gas themselves out quite quickly. Within a minute, 90 seconds, they're done for. They've given it all in that first run. They don't know what's happening, and they soon give themselves up. And that's exactly what happened this time. A screaming run, it charged off into the main body of water, and I had a lot of difficulty trying to stop it, thinking I was definitely going to lose this fish, but before long, he gave himself up. He was in the net, and I had a 20 pound common, pretty much standard for what we've been seeing down there, but a really beautiful fish. And I just remember being in disbelief that I managed to catch a carp so quickly from such a vast amount of water, and potentially I was the only person who's ever held that carp in my hands. I slipped her back, got the rods back out. I was only going to stay till sort of 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't want to take the mickey and stay there all day and risk being caught by the rangers. So I flicked the rods back out, not expecting another bite, but I was gobsmacked when pretty much as soon as I flicked the rods out, bubbles started appearing again, fish activity. I could see them coming down on the spot, and I had another bite. Now this one felt a little bit bigger straight away. Still went on that crazy initial run, but it went for a little bit longer. And when it came back in, it was still fighting a little bit more. In the net, I thought it might be a scrape of 30, put it on the scales, and 30 pounder. So within 2 fish, I'd caught a wild 30 pounder from a 100 acre plus reservoir. It was an amazing start, and I mean, I'd loved the place before that, but that little morning session, it solidified my obsession with this place. Louis and I, we obviously started fishing pretty regularly this place. I mean, we'd found a gem. We were going down there, baiting up, sneaking in. But it was everything a carp angler wants, honestly. You picture in your head sometimes what's the perfect fishing situation. For me, this was it. No one knew we were there, no one was bothering us. We were hiding away in this beautiful environment, catching stunning, wild, uncaught carp. I think I caught 6 or 7 myself, up to that 30 pounder that I caught. Lou was catching some nice ones as well. He had a couple of really, really stunning mid-20 commons. We didn't catch any of the big ones, but we were catching fish and we were loving it. However, at this point, we started getting a little bit more brazen with our sessions. We were parking the van a little bit closer than we probably should have to the swim. We were staying a little bit later than we should in the morning and getting there a little bit earlier in the evening for our sessions. And sadly, yes, we did get caught by one of the rangers who asked us to move on. And before we knew it, that first spring was over. To be honest, I didn't think it was going to be that long until the fish moved out of their spring, little lake and into the main body of water, which I soon found out this is exactly what they were going to be doing every single year. They'd spend their spring in the little lake before moving off into the main body of water and spending the summer, autumn and winter out there. So the timing wasn't terrible. We'd caught some nice fish, but I don't think we'd even scratched the surface. I was gutted to have been kicked off on that first spring, but I had so much fishing going on in my life at the time, with trips over to Europe, other little campaigns in the UK, that I hadn't really missed it so much. Of course, I'd loved my time there, and I still thought of it fondly, but I wasn't as obsessed and disappointed with not being able to fish there anymore as I thought I would have been. However, as the colder weather rolled in and I was being reflective over the year of fishing I'd had, all I was thinking about was that place. All I was thinking about was that big reservoir, those beautiful spring mornings, seeing fish drop down, feeding on my spot, the baiting campaign, being left alone. It was all that was going on in my head. So I made the decision, it was a pretty easy decision, that I was going to go back for the following spring and do the same thing again, albeit a different approach to reduce the chance of being caught and hopefully fish it even more effectively and catch more of the fish in the lake. I decided that the best thing to do was not fish that road swim anymore. And what I was going to do is I was going to park up in the village about a mile away, walk down, cut through a few fields, through a bit of marshland and fish it from a bank that's pretty much inaccessible. Now, the reason we didn't do this the previous year was because we started so late in the year that by the time we thought that it was a possibility of fishing from this bank, the foliage had grown up so much that it was just impossible to break through it to get to the water's edge. However, by going down in February, clearing a bit of a pathway to the swim, it meant it was possible later in the year to fish from this part of the lake. We also had an island in front of us, which meant we couldn't be seen from the main road. For me, it was absolutely perfect. So that was the plan. Louis had done something similar on the other side of the lake. So we sort of had our own little areas of water. We'd split up a little bit at this point in terms of approach to fishing the place. He had one area, I had my own area, and I was just focusing on that. I actually started going down in February, like I said, to start clearing the swim. But also at this point, I raked the swim in front of me to get rid of any dying weed, any dead weed, anything like that, anything that could be obstructing the bottom, as well as starting to bait up with salt. From the middle of February until the middle of March, I put in quite a lot of salt, maybe 2 kilos every 2 weeks, just on the thought that as soon as the carp came into that part of the lake, I wanted them to home in on my area. After a couple of baiting up sessions with just the salt, I started including tigers as well. Now, the reason I just put tigers in is because they last a long time on the bottom. If I put boilies in and no carp turned up in 10 days and didn't eat the bait, then that bait could be rotten on the bottom, and before I know it, the spot's ruined. So by just putting tigers in, I knew they could sit there for 6 weeks if it took that long for the carp to show up. And once they did show up, the bait would still be good for them to eat. I'd stashed gear down there as well, a couple of little dwarf rods, a landing net, an old unhooking mat. Everything was stashed down there, hidden away. So all I had to do when I wanted to start fishing was park up in the village, walk the mile or so down to the swim, cut through, and I'd be in my swim. So it was all working out perfectly, and I just wanted this plan to come together like I had pictured it in my head. I've got to say that at this point, I'd moved away from my parents' house. I'd moved down to London. So baiting up trips became more and more difficult. I was coinciding them with it whenever I'd go back to watch my football team play Derby County. So yeah, at this point, every 2 weeks or so, I was going up, putting in the salt and the tigers, and just making sure everything was perfect when the carp did show up. Early April came by, and my syndicate ticket for a lake nearby had just started. I was going to do a 5-night session near the start of April. The week before I'd been down, I'd put in my tigers, my salt, and I started putting a bit of boilie and particle as well. At the start of my 5-night session on the syndicate, I was going to bait up on the res, do my session on the syndicate, and then come back and at least do 1 session on the res. That was the plan. And when I came down at the start of the session, things were looking pretty bleak. I hadn't really seen any carp at this point. I was feeling a little bit like, do they get in this early in the year? Will they get in at all? Will they come this far back into this little lake? Will they only stay around the roadside? I put the bait in, didn't really think much more about it, went and did my syndicate session, and then came back with little expectation of actually catching anything. However, when I came up on the bank and looked down on my spot, there was about 10 carp feeding on my exact baited spot, and there were some nice ones in there as well, and I knew that the plan had worked exactly how I wanted it to, and I was in a situation now where I could catch these wild carp. Over the course of the next few hours of that session, I managed 5 bites, landed 4 of them, with the biggest one being a beautiful 27-pound two-tone common.
Well, that didn't take long at all. Might have been out 2 minutes. Just gonna do some south takes. It's gone again. One of the bigger commons. Got in there. First one. Mega fish. Big old tail, look at that. Average size for this place. There's a few special ones in here. Check that one. A little bit bigger. Mid-20. Just cool fish, man. Art dodger. Yellow scope squid. Over loads of pre-bait. Get in.
Started, the season on this weather started, it was getting all my attention because I knew that my plan had worked. Pre-baiting, all that effort had come together and it was time to reap the rewards. My main concern at this point was keeping all the bait going in. I was in full fishing mode that spring. I had my syndicate, I had the res, and I had filming trips with Nash. So my main concern was, can I just keep enough bait going in? Combined with the fact that I'm living in London now and it's a 4-hour round trip to get bait in, I really had to pull out all the stops, put in all the effort to ensure I could keep bait going in, so that when I did have that 4 or 5 hours to fish, I could go there knowing that there'd be an opportunity to catch a carp. So that's what I did. When I'd be going away on European trips, let's say I was going to Europe for 5 nights, I would do a detour up north, bait up, and when I came back, I would go straight up again and bait again. Whenever I was fishing nearby, I would drop in some bait, and it was taxing at times. Sometimes I would come home from work, drive 2 hours north, bait up and come straight back down. That's how much I wanted to catch these carp. It was taking a lot out of me, it was doing a lot of miles up and down the motorway, but when I did get those opportunities to fish, I was catching carp, and for me, that made it all worthwhile. I spent some amazing spring days there, tucked away underneath the shade, watching as these carp would ghost over my spot, drop down before. You'd see a flash of their underbelly as they twisted after being hooked and bolting off out the channel. And I'd jump down, try and stop them from going around the island before bringing them up and netting them. I had some really, really nice fish, a few 30-pound commons, some beautiful upper 20 commons, but my favourite one from that spring was the ghosty. We'd seen this one since the very beginning. I'd seen it on my spot loads and loads of time, and I just got to the point where I thought I'd seen it feeding so much and not caught it. I thought it was one of them tricky, ornamental fish that were just so difficult to catch. I remember it came in one day, they'd been feeding all day, and it came in with a group of 3 commons. They all dropped down. Before long, I had a bite. I ran down to the rod, thinking I caught one of the smaller commons, and then out the channel I see the ghosty swimming with my pop-up hanging out of his mouth. It absolutely tried to do me around the back of the island. I managed to steer it away, and it just kept going on these runs and runs. As soon as I bring it back, it would go around the island again. It was fighting like none of the other fish fought. It had so much stamina and so much desire to get around the back of the island and out into the main lake. Thankfully, I did net it. I looked down at it, twisted it on its side, and saw how much size it had to it. When you look down on it, it was thick, but you couldn't see the depth of the fish. In the net, I saw the depth, and I knew it was a big one. It was just shy of 38 pounds. It was the biggest fish that I'd caught from the lake at that point, and it just blew me away.
What a fish. What a fish. Mega one.
I think that fish, it probably came from someone emptying their pond out years ago. The fish had got too big, they don't want any more, they put it in there. Since then, it probably never come into contact with another human until I had my moment with it. I remember calling my mates after leaving the lake after that session, just so excited, and looking back on that photo time and time again. I mean, I know not everyone loves the ghosty, but for me, this fish, yeah, it was one of my most prized captures. The fish began spawning at this point, so I left them alone for a couple of weeks. I put a big hit of bait in, came back a few weeks later, and carried on catching. I think I finished that spring on 20 fish. One of my favourite post-spawning captures was this breeze block, black common, low 30s. Again, an absolute, just amazing carp. The story of how it got there, how it got to that size, has it been caught before? Each carp that I caught was special because of those exact reasons, but some were more special than others, and this one was a truly special one. Now, I will say at this point that the swim that I'd built was very obviously a swim. I'd spent so much time down there that you could tell that someone had been there. It just looked so different to the rest of the landscape, which was 6-foot high nettles, and all of a sudden it would open up, and it was quite obvious that someone had been fishing there. So to get to that point where you're standing in that swim was very difficult. You had to go through the marshland, traipse through everything, make sure you're going down the right path. It was very difficult to get there, But once you got there, I'm thinking, you're going to know it's a swim. So my plan at this point was to set up a trail cam so that if anyone came into the swim, if any of the rangers came into the swim and saw it, I would know about it, and I would know, right, okay, they're going to be onto you because they've seen your swim. And it worked perfectly, this plan. However, the only problem was that the first time a ranger did come into the swim, I was already fishing at the venue, and at this point I was asked to move on.
How you doing, mate?
You alright, how you doing?
Best you pack up and go.
I think so.
I've got your card details as well. If I ever see it here again, I'll call the old bill.
Alright, mate.
Alright?
After being caught that second time, I told myself I wasn't going to go back. It wasn't fair on the rangers, and I'd been caught. That's it, game over. But that winter cold period came again, and all I could think about was those fish, the type of fishing I was doing, and I just couldn't help myself. I was also thinking of where are the mirrors. At this point, besides the ghosty, I'd caught maybe 30 carp in total, and they were all commons. They were all nice commons, but I'd seen mirrors. I'd seen that old half-lin mirror. I'd seen a bigger, more pale mirror as well that looked around 30 pound, and I'd yet to catch one. So I was also thinking, is there a 40 pounder in there? Like some of the fish that I'd seen, they did, relative to the ghosty size, it looked like they could be pushing 40. Am I really not going to keep fishing this place? And I was truthful with myself. I had the devil and the angel on each shoulder, persuading me on each direction to go, and in the end I caved and was like, right, I'm going to do one more spring on there. I did the same thing again. I got down there in February. I approached the swim from a slightly different angle this time. It meant a bit more of a longer walk, but the reason I think I got caught the previous year was through the marshland, you had seen my footprints, you'd seen the path I was taking. It was very unlikely that he was going to see it anyway, but he'd already seen it the previous spring, so I was going to go an even longer way through even more forest land to try and hide my tracks a little bit more. It meant a little bit more effort, but for me, I had to do it to ensure that I could get a little bit of fishing on the place again. I did the same thing again. I went down in February, I raked the spot, then I salted the spot, then I salted and tigered the spot, and then I started introducing a little bit more bait.
Okay, we've just got to the swim, and it looks like no one's been here for a while, which is a good sign. It looks very different how it looks in the spring. Everything's died down, everything looks very accessible right now. I can tell you that as soon as everything starts growing in spring, this becomes a bit of a pain to get to. All the grass around me will be 6 foot high with stinging nettles, and everything will be overgrown, and the swim will get hard to get to. I've just felt the bottom and it feels really clean. I'm going to put the rake through a few times just to make sure, but yeah, it seems fine. So I think if I get some tigers on there and a bit of salt, then it should mean that once the fish get into this area, they'll start feeding, and that'll stop the weed growth so that it's clear for when I come and bait it again, which will probably be in about a month's time. That's when I think that it's worth starting to put boardies in.
Now, we had quite a warm spring that year, and the fish got in there a little bit earlier than expected. I remember getting down there late March, and I'd bought a drone at this point. I remember putting the drone up, flying it over to see if I could see any fish in the area, and what I saw was about an acre of the little lake smoked up like I'd never seen before, and in the smoke you could see the shape of fish. What I think had happened is the fish had moved in from the large body of water into the little lake, and they were just gorging on all the naturals in that silty bottom that they hadn't had access to for the past 9 months, and they were just going crazy for it. So at this point I was like, right, okay, it's game on. I'm weeks away, less than that, I'm days away from finding my bait, being on my bait regularly, and being in a position to catch them. So the baiting went up a notch or two. The trips from London up to the lake increased as well. The petrol, the miles, they all turned up a notch. But I was in a position now to start fishing again. I went down there just at the start of April. It was freezing cold still, and I was worried that the drop in that warm spring, early spring we'd had would have pushed the fish out. I did see the odd fish milling around a weed bed nearby, so I thought, right, it's worth fishing. After 3-4 hours, which is pretty much the length of any session I do on there, I was about to reel in when I had to take a bit out of the blue. I never saw the fish come in on the spot. Played this fish, got it in the net, and it was a 30 pounder to kick off the year.
Fish number 1 of the season. Oh, I really didn't think it was going to happen. Didn't seem to be any fish here. I put the drone up on the far side of the lake, and they seem to all be over there. Can't get to it. Even debating reeling in, put a bit more bait in and come back in the day, but I thought I'd stick it out. And it's just a lone fish has obviously come in, picked up the bait. Looks like it's an all right one as well.
I was ecstatic that I'd managed to catch one that early, whereas in previous years, in the first year I hadn't started fishing till end of May, and the previous year it wasn't until the beginning of May. So I got a month head start here, I'd already got a bite, the fish, they must know that the bait was there, it was game on. My fishing in Europe began even more intensely at this point, and it was making the baiting very, very difficult. Like I said, when I would go over to the Eurotunnel, I would detour those. Sometimes it would be a 3-4 hour detour to put the bait in, and as soon as I got back from those long trips, I'd go straight up and put another big hit of bait in before I started fishing it again. So it was hard work, but we had to do it. It was just in the back of my mind, I was sometimes saying to myself, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But I just knew as soon as I stopped baiting that spot, the fish would move off, they'd move to a different part of the little lake, and it would become so much more difficult to actually fish for them. So I had to put the bait in there, but it worked again. I started catching whenever I'd go up, anything from mid-20 commons all the way up to a mega 35-pound common that I nicknamed double dorsal.
Funny old dorsal on it.
A lot of the fish in this lake, they had a weird mark on their back. Originally, I thought it was from otters because otters were a bit of an issue on the lake. In the first year, I had an incredible encounter with otters where they'd swam in on feeding carp, trying to herd them and feed on them, and the carp managed to escape, and it was mind-blowing to watch. So I thought that these scars on the fish were otters, but I've since learned that all the fish that I'd caught where they had a little nick out their back that had since healed, there must have been 4 or 5 of them, and this double dorsal was one of them. They were actually live bait escapees. I spoke to someone who used to fish there back in the day for the pike, and they would use carp as live bait, and obviously sometimes the carp would escape off the trebles, or they release a few at the end, and this is pretty much where the entire carp stock came from. They'd intended to be in the belly of pike, yet they managed to escape that, and we're now living in this vast lake, and I was catching some of them, and some of them got to massive sizes. To think that they were once tiny little carp, that sort of size, and now it was this 35-pound stunning chestnut common that I had in my hand. Yeah, it was a cool thing to learn about that backstory. But I was still to catch a mirror. It had just been commons at this point. I'd maybe had 8 or 9 fish that spring so far. And although I'd seen a few mirrors, maybe 3 or 4 different ones that I could identify, yeah, I hadn't caught one yet. Then I had a mad period where I had 4 bites in a row and 3 of them were mirrors. The first one was this really pretty little mirror, maybe 22, 23 pound, but a really, really stunning fish. Following that, I had the halfling that I'd seen in the first year that I hadn't seen for 18 months at that point. Really, really old fish. It reminded me of old Fenland carp. It was, yeah, a special carp, just under 30 pounds. And then I followed that up by the plainer mirror that I'd seen the previous spring. And this one went over 30 pounds, it was 31 pound. And it's just mad to think that at that point I'd had 40 carp maybe, which is half the lake stock as my estimate, and not a single mirror. And then all of a sudden you catch, yeah, pretty much 3 mirrors on the bounce. Yeah, it's weird how things were like that. I had my first recapture as well at this point. That 2-tone common I caught my first session of the second spring was now a 31 pound common during the recapture. And I think that the fish was starting to put on this weight across the board. In my first year, the average size of fish we caught was about 21, 22 pound between me and Louis. The second year it went up to about 26 pound. And then this spring, it was probably close to 28, 29 pound. I caught a lot of 30 pounders that year. And I think that the fish were really getting on the bait, putting on a lot of weight and getting big. And it's just made me realise how big these fish can get, because they've got to a decent size on naturals. Me putting in a little bit of boilie, they've gotten even bigger. Who knows what they could get to with a real big hit of angler's bait. The carp had spawned, spring was ending, and I just knew my time was limited until the fish would move off and go into the main body of the lake. I decided at this point I'm going to commit to like a 3-night session. I'd never even done a night at this point, but I decided I'm going to do a couple of nights and see what I can catch. I did a massive pre-bait beforehand. I put in about 15 kilos. And then I went up a couple of days later and there was fish all over me, all around the weed bed in front of me, and then on my spot there must have been 20, 25 carp. Got rods out, and in that 3-4 hour period until darkness fell, I think it was about 4 fish. Nothing massive, biggest one was mid-20, but yeah, I had a good hit of fish, and I was just thinking, right, if there's a big carp in this lake, or if there's any more special mirrors, anything like that, I think I'm going to catch it over the next few days. It's my last chance to catch them before I really think they're going to move off and go into their summer and autumn areas. Now at this point I'm going to say I had never worried about being caught by the rangers. My route down to the swim was so off the beaten track, I just never thought they'd find it. But there was one way I could be seen. If someone was in a boat in the little lake, they would be able to see my swim and see me, especially if I was there. So as darkness fell that evening, I could hear the sound of a boat engine, which you hear all the time because there's so many flying on the other side of the road. But it was getting late, and I thought, I've never heard one that late before. I remember looking up and seeing through the passageway underneath the road a boat coming through, and I just knew at that point that they were coming for me, and I was busted. He made a beeline straight across towards me, and I held my hands up and said, yeah, I'm sorry, mate, I've been fishing here. I promise this is the last time I'm going to leave. And that was it. That was the end of 3 springs fishing, the best UK fishing I've ever had. Now, during the conversation with this ranger, in which I apologised and said that I was sorry and said that I'd leave, he actually told me that they were thinking of turning the venue into a carp syndicate, because a lot of the fly anglers had seen the carp when they were out in the boats. And he asked me what I thought of this, and I told him that, yeah, I mean, there's some nice carp in here, like you wouldn't go wrong for turning it into a carp syndicate. Fast forward a year, and that's what they did. They turned it into a carp syndicate. I was actually offered a ticket, but I thought that I'd had the best of it. I'd had it to myself, that perhaps it wasn't the smartest thing in the world to potentially taint my memory of the place. But it seems like it's doing absolutely amazing. I keep in touch with a few of the members. They're having the best time on there from what I can tell, and I'm not surprised. They're catching a lot of the fish that I caught. They're putting on a lot of weight, as I predicted they would with a bit of bait. They're getting big. And one bit of comfort that I'll take is that the first 40 pounder that got caught from there was the ghosty that I'd had at 37. So unless it does a surprise real big one, then I don't think there was that monster in there that I never managed to catch. I think I did catch the big one. And also one of the commons that I caught at 35, double dorsal, that's come out at one of the top weights for any of the other fish at 38, 39 pounds. So it's nice to know that I did have the best of the stock as well. It eases my mind a little bit, because after I got caught and left for that final time, I was always just thinking, what if it did have that 45-pound ridiculously scaly carp? And it might still have that, it might still be in there. It could definitely throw up that capture, because I don't think all the fish have been caught by the syndicate members yet, but there's a little bit of peace in my mind knowing that that's not the case, and perhaps I did have everything I wanted in terms of the fish from that lake. But you never know. That is the beauty of an unknown stock. It's unknown. You're never going to know for sure until 3 or 4 years down the line of it being a carp syndicate and the stock being documented and recorded, and everyone knows for sure. But even at this point, you really don't know for sure what's in there. I look back on my time at that venue, and it was just the best UK fishing I could hope to experience. Wild, untouched, with unknown carp. A type of carp fishing that is rarely found nowadays, and yes, I had to break some rules to experience it, and I'm very sorry to the rangers for any grief I may have caused them, but I wouldn't have changed it. To those lucky enough to undergo an angling adventure similar to this, I hope that you cherish it and make the most of it, as it's likely to be some of the best angling you will ever have the pleasure of experiencing. And to the boys in the syndicate now, I wish you the best of luck as you fish for some epic carp in the most wonderful of environments.
And I was running far away. Would I run off the world someday? Nobody knows, nobody knows. And I was dancing in the rain. I felt alive and I can't complain. But no, take me home where I belong. I can't can't take it anymore.